But the Homestead Act was one of the greatest deals for Americans at the time. What it did was, I always remember it as 160 for five for free. 160 for five for free. And that what that means is, as an American taking advantage of the Homestead Act through the government, you could apply to be a part of the land race, where you would race out and claim some land, and you could claim up to, that's the key, up to 160 acres of land. And as long as you farmed that land, the word was improved, as long as you improved the land, which means you farmed it, for 5 years, you would get the land for free. So what happened is, you would ride west, you would throw a flag in the ground, claim your land. You could get 1 acre, you could get 10 acres, you could get 20 acres, or you could get up to 160 acres. But the thing about it is, people would bite off more than they could chew. They would go out there and they would say, I'm getting all 160 acres. Well, the problem with that is, you have to farm that land. There has to be proof that you are farming that land for 5 years. And if you ain't farming it, then the government will make you pay for it, or they'll take it away from you. And so they would send out twice a year, sometimes more than that, a government official to check your land and to see, are you farming? It's real simple. They just ride a horse up, look at your land. If you ain't farming it, they'd give you a warning. At some point, they'd take your land away from you. And so you never wanted to bite off more than you could chew. The smart person would only claim 4, 5, 6, 7 acres of land. The greedy person would claim 160 acres, and they could never farm all that land. But it was a great deal to get our country moving west, get off the East Coast, and to get our economy booming with agriculture and exploding our population in the United States. But that was called the Homestead Act. And again, it was 160 acres up to, you didn't have to get 160, but up to 160 acres of land. You had to farm it for 5 years. If you did that, it cost you nothing. It was absolutely free. So obviously, you're going to see in our country during this time period in the early 1800s, a very farming society. But it was a farming society that would also congregate together and form cities. And then again, this was all exploded by the railroads. The railroads were bringing people and products just daily west along the railroad lines. And so farmers became a huge part of our economy in the early 1800s with westward expansion and the changing type of economy that we were having early on. Speaking of the farmers, they became such a big and integral part of our country. You do see massive innovations during the westward expansion movement. Eventually, later in the 1800s, you're going to see the invention of the steel plow by John Deere, the reaping and harvesting machine by Cyrus McCormick, Eli Whitney's cotton gin, the refrigerated railroad car, where now you can start moving meat in a refrigerated railroad car, which saves so much money because you don't have to load the full cattle on the railroads, because you're getting charged by the pound and distance. So you could definitely see how the refrigerated railroad car changed the economy of agriculture and ranching. But innovations like barbed wire, Joseph Glidden's barbed wire, a very cheap wire that kept cattle in one area. Instead of having to build a big steel or brick fence, which is super expensive, you could just use wire, a very easy barbed wire, which helped with farming and ranching. Lots of innovations with farming that really sped up the process of growing crops, which led to more money and more population in our country. With this, you do see some problems emerge, and so farmers feel like they're starting to get taken advantage of, and so you'll see they want a bigger political voice because they work so hard and maybe don't make a ton of money, and they do form the first union in our country. A union is a group of workers all in one area. So a union would be a union of workers. They're powerful because if you get a bunch of workers together in a union and they all threaten to quit, then all of a sudden the employers, the owners of the company, they have the employees have a little bit more power. But anyway, the first union was the Grange. It was a union of farmers. It's spelled Grange, the Grange. They are a union of farmers. They got together and they, quite frankly, demanded that the railroad companies and the railroad owners stop screwing them over on the pricing. And so what was happening with the railroads is the railroads knew that the farmers needed them to move their product, and so the railroads would start screwing them by jacking up the prices of transportation. And so the farmers just all got together and said, look, if you're going to do that, we're just not going to use your railroad. And they become a political voice. They get some laws passed like the Interstate Commerce Act that start regulating what's called price fixing or price gouging. And so the farmers become a very big political active force with the union called the Grange. And then lastly, their political force actually gets a name. They become a political party called the Populist Party, Populist. The Populist Party is predominantly made up of agricultural farmers, and they become a huge force in the political realm. They don't necessarily ever win a presidential election, but they can take votes away from a political candidate. And that's what happened quite often. One of their big beliefs and one of their big demands with the Populist Party was they had two big demands, the Populist Party, the farmers. Demand number one was the graduated income tax. They believed that income taxes should gradually go up when your income went up. So the graduated income tax, which was what we use today kind of, was a big demand by the farmers. And then another thing was the gold standard. They believed in not just having the dollar bill backed by gold. They wanted the dollar bill backed by both gold and silver, which is called bimetallism. Frank Baum writes a book called The Wonderful Wizard of Oz about this. You've seen the movie The Wizard of Oz. That whole movie and that book is basically about farmers wanting gold and silver to be the backing force of the dollar bill. It never happened. It was gold only. But the reason why they wanted it to be gold and silver is that they believed that if you throw silver in there, that would produce more dollar bills. And if there's more dollar bills, everybody's more rich. The reality is that's not true. You may have more dollar bills in your pocket, but there's going to be something called inflation, which means they're just going to start charging. They're going to realize that the dollar bill is not as valuable. So Walmart's just going to jack the price up of the goods. So yeah, you may have more dollar bills, but the dollar bills aren't worth as much because you're backing them by silver instead of gold. And retail places like the mall and Walmart and Burger King are just going to jack the prices up because they know that the dollar bill is not valuable. So, but that's not what the farmer believed. The farmer believed in bimetallism, and the farmer wanted the dollar bill to be backed by silver and gold. That's called bimetallism, and that was their second demand. So two demands of the Populist Party farmers were graduated income tax, meaning I'll pay more taxes only if I make more money, and bimetallism, the backing of the dollar bill by gold and silver, not just gold. I threw a lot at you today, so I'll stop, but that really sets up the westward movement of our country with motives to go west, manifest destiny. God tells us to go west. A shift from rural to more urban settings, and how we got out there through the railroads. And then, of course, with farming exploding, you started seeing a lot more farming innovations. And then farmers became a very active force with the Grange and their political party called the Populist Party.